Praise the Lord, my dear friends. We are on the first Sunday after Christmas, and it is the feast of the Holy Family. A very happy feast to each one of you. We all come from wonderful families, and so it's a feast for all of us. Today in the first reading, taken from the first book of Samuel, chapter 1, verses 20 to 22, and again 24 to 28, we see how the parents of Samuel brought baby Samuel and presented in the temple. They dedicated him in the temple. And verse 28, chapter 1 verse 28 we read, they left him in the temple and returned home. So Samuel grew up right from his childhood in the temple. And later in chapter 3 verse 19 we read, as Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and did not let any of his words fall to the ground. How did Samuel develop that kind of a personality? We know later again the Lord used Samuel to establish kingship in Israel. The Lord continually guided his people through prophet Samuel. How did he become such a personality? To find an answer, we need to look at his own family, the family from where he came. We have his parents Elkanah and Hannah. When we read chapter 1 of the first book of Samuel, we see the lifestyle of his parents. If we look at Elkanah, his father, chapter 1 verse 3, we read that Elkanah was a person who went to the temple to offer sacrifice year after year. So here we see a father who was so committed and dedicated in his practices of piety, was very committed in his prayer life. And later in chapter 1 verse 8 we see that Elkanah would give a double portion to his wife Hannah. It's because Elkanah had two wives, one is Peninnah, the other one is Hannah. Peninnah had children. And when Elkanah would come back after the sacrifice, he would share his portion of the sacrifice with his family. So he would give a share to Peninnah and her sons. But when he gave it to Hannah, he would give a double share. Why? Because it is mentioned that Hannah did not have children. The Lord had closed her womb. So here we see Elkanah showing extra concern, extra love to someone who is weak in the family. So this should also make us think how we treat people in our families who require extra care and attention. Maybe elderly parents, grandparents, children and so on. Those who need extra care and attention should be taken care like Elkanah took care of his wife Hannah. Later again in verse 23, we see that Elkanah and the entire household was planning to go up to the temple, and Hannah said that she wouldn't join. Of course, it was after the birth of Samuel. She wanted to go later. And here Elkanah tells Hannah, okay, do whatever seems to be the best for you. See, Elkanah never forced Hannah, but he said, do whatever seems best for you. Here we see a husband who respected the desires, the likes, dislikes, the opinions, etc. of his partner. And let us look at his mother, Hannah. Chapter 1 verse 10, we see her pleading before the Lord. She was deeply distressed because she did not have children, and she cried before the Lord bitterly. See, here we have a mother who was able to pray before the Lord in tears. And later after the prayer we see her coming back, joining with the husband, and it is mentioned that her countenance was no longer sad. See, she was an individual who was able to unload all her worries and anxieties before the Lord and find joy and consolation in the Lord. And chapter 1 verse 19, after they prayed in the temple, we see them on the next morning getting up early in the morning and worshipping the Lord. Look at this family. Here we see a family that gets up early in the morning to worship the Lord. And they got up early in the morning to pray before they started their journey back to Ramah, their hometown. So here we see a family that gets up early in the morning and spends time worshipping the Lord before they started a journey. Or we can say there is a family that is united in prayer before they do anything serious. Or there is a family that comes together for prayer, family prayer, and so on. And again, when we look at Hannah, we see chapter 1 verse 23. After the birth of Samuel, when Elkanah and the entire household decided to go to the temple, she says that she would not join them, but she wanted to go later. And that is where Elkanah said, okay, do what seems best to you. And what actually seemed best to her, she says it in verse 23 of chapter 1. I will bring him there that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and he may remain there forever. Look at this mother. For this mother, what seemed best? Her child remaining in the presence of the Lord forever. So we see a wonderful model family where parents are very serious about their prayer life, very committed to their practices of piety, respects each other's likes and dislikes, listens to each other's opinions, and so on. And here we see a mother whose priority is to bring up the children in the presence of the Lord. And as we said earlier, they left him there in the temple and returned home. And Samuel grew, and Samuel was in the temple. That would mean he was constantly in the presence of God. And that is why chapter 3 verse 19 we see the Lord was with him. So what exactly is a temple? What differentiates a temple from other buildings? We know it is not the structure, it is not the paintings and so on. What actually differentiates a temple from other buildings is the fact that in the temple God dwells. It is the presence of the Lord that makes a difference. It is in the temple that the Lord dwells, and it is in the temple that we go to meet the Lord and to worship the Lord. And you see, the Lord was with Samuel. That means it was not only that Samuel was in the temple, but he himself became a temple. He constantly kept himself in the presence of the Lord, so he made himself a temple. That is why we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 16. Don't you know that you are the temple of the Lord? Each one of us are temples of God. Or we can say that each one of us can be temples of God once we live constantly in the presence of God. And look at Samuel. He came from a family that lived constantly in the presence of God. Or that family for them became a temple. And it's not only that they were careful about the practices of piety, they were also careful how they dealt with each other, how they respected each other. And we know in the second reading, St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 3, verse 12 to 21, we read, above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds everything together in harmony. So here we see a family that was really united in love. And it is from such a family that Samuel came. So this was a family that made itself a temple where the Lord dwelt. And in today's Gospel, according to St. Luke, chapter 2, verses 41 to 52, we see how child Jesus was lost in the temple and Mother Mary and St. Joseph, after 3 days, found him in the temple. And here, chapter 2, verse 49, Jesus asks them a question. Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? And in some other versions of the Bible, we have, did you not know that I must be busy in my Father's business? Or I must be busy in my Father's affairs, and so on. Look at this. Where was Jesus found? He was found in the temple. Where was he busy? He was busy in the temple doing the Father's business. That is what he said. So, if a family takes care to make itself a temple, by maybe following the example of the parents of Samuel, being very dedicated and committed to the practices of piety, showing care and concern for every member of the family, especially the weak ones, respecting every individual's opinions, desires, likes and dislikes, and so on, and setting the priority for the family as to bring up the children in the presence of the Lord, and so on, we will notice that Jesus will be busy in that family doing the business of his Father. You see, Jesus was busy doing the Father's affairs in the temple. So if a family makes itself a temple where God dwells, Jesus will make himself busy in that family, accomplishing the wonderful plans that God has for that family, especially in the life of the children that are growing up. So as we celebrate this feast, the Feast of the Most Holy Family, let us also see how we can make our own families temples of God by allowing God's presence to remain in our family through practices of piety, through regular prayer life, and also through genuine expressions of sincere love. May God bless each one of us.